Karasoff from the Yerba Buena chapter of CNPS, that is San Francisco, where she gardens on clay soil and focuses on plants edible to humans as well as native insects and other wildlife. She'll highlight Marin's edible native plants that can be grown in our own gardens and describe their uses by the Coast Miwok people. So please welcome Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Karasoff from California Native Plant Society, Yerba Buena. And I'm hoping you can all see my screen. So there's going to be a lot of information today, and it is being recorded. It will be on Marin, CNPS Marin's YouTube channel, and so you can rewatch it. But yeah, there's just a lot of information because Marin has got a lot of edible native plants. So we're going to talk about why plant natives, edible native plants for Marin, container gardening with edible native plants, year-round buffets for people and wildlife, gardening with native plants, and some native garden resources. So why plant native plants? Well, Marin has got a variety of different soils and extremely varied weather. And all of our native plants evolved together in plant communities on these soils in this weather. So they are resilient to California's extremely differing weather. So the rainfall chart there is for San Francisco specifically. I believe Marin has got even higher rainfall than San Francisco does, but you have the same dry summers that we do. And so look at the error bars on that chart. There's not only variation from month to month, but there's enormous variation within months, depending on whether or not we get an atmospheric river like we are getting right now and like we got in late October of 2021. Last year, San Francisco got 8 inches of rain, which was almost as low as our as the record that we've set. 7 inches, and we've gotten as much as 50. And our plants are adapted to this. So if anyone tells you, oh, we need to plant Southern California plants to be able to deal with climate change, no, we can plant our very own native plants. So many of them have got ranges down to Southern California, and they can deal with low rainfall, especially if they are established and they are planted in their plant communities. So what are plant communities? I have to call out CNPS Marin. You guys have got a great page on your variety of plant communities. You've got at least a dozen. And so these are just 5 of them that have got some delicious edible native plants in them. Plant communities are the base of our local food web, not only for people, but also for all of the wildlife that help propagate those plants. So when we plant our native plants, especially in their plant communities, we give that gift of resilience back to our landscape and to ourselves and to the wildlife with whom we share our landscape. So insects are declining, and not only are insects declining, but our birds are declining as well. Our insects co-evolved with our native plants, especially any insect that goes through a caterpillar phase, a larva phase. So our butterflies, our moths, so many of our other insects go through a phase, through a larva phase, sort of their adolescence, and they need the leaves with which they co-evolved. And so our insects are looking for our native plants, and our baby birds are looking for caterpillars. Our terrestrial baby birds have very, very soft throats, just like the human babies, and they can only eat soft food. So that means caterpillars or aphids, but a big caterpillar is just so much more food, soft and protein filled, than an aphid is. And so we want to encourage having our native plants so that we can encourage having those caterpillars, so that we encourage having our birds. All of these, plus our bees and our specialist bees, are dependent on our native plants. This is how we have our food web work for human beings as well as for wildlife. So thanks to Dr. Doug Tallamy at the University of Delaware, we know a great deal more about which plants support and feed how many species of specifically butterfly and moth caterpillars. So Dr. Doug Tallamy and his graduate students studied that for the University of Delaware area, for the Washington, DC metro area. And they discovered that there was a hierarchy of plants, that some plants that were the keystone species that fed hundreds of different caterpillar species. Introduced plants can feed generally between 0 and 2 species. Our native plants, the plants with which our insects co-evolved, can feed hundreds. So for instance, the willow is the top for Marin and for San Francisco. But even if you don't have a damp space where you can put a willow, if you've got space for an oak or a cherry or bishop pine, the ribes, all of the ribes family have got edible berries. So many wonderful plants that we have that just feed hundreds of species. And this is interesting. So the USDA, US Department of Agriculture, is in charge of honeybees. Honeybees are treated like tiny little cattle, but honeybees are not native to North or South America. They are native to Europe and Asia. Our pollinators here, our specialist bees, we've got 4,000 bee species in the United States, 1,500 bee species in California, and 200 bee species in the San Francisco Bay Area. And our specialist bees use this incredible list of plants, of native plants, because again, their larvae depend on having the pollen for these species, from these species. So here are butterflies and moths. Here's the list for our specialist bees. Those are really different lists. So if you're looking for really any excuse to plant more native plants, these are your excuses. Look, I want birds. I want bees. I want pollinators. I want a functioning ecosystem. Yes, go forth and get all of the native plants you could possibly get and shove them all into not only your personal space, but all of the spaces around you. So this is a summary of Dr. Doug Tallamy's latest book, Nature's Best Hope. He's saying that for us to each contribute to the function of our local ecosystem, that we need to plant our local native keystone species, plant a variety of native plants, plant for those specialist pollinators, make sure that we've got caterpillar pupation sites. In other words, where can caterpillars crawl off, make little cocoons and hide from birds that would still love to eat them when they're in their cocoons. And that means leaving our leaves on the ground, at least some of them, so that they can hide, perhaps coordinating with your neighbors to have even more space to put native plants, and avoiding spraying insecticide and herbicide, and building a conservation hardscape. So only having the lights come on when there's motion, perhaps installing a little bit of a dish of water or a water bubbler. I am an extremely lazy gardener, so I don't have a water bubbler. I hear they're amazing, but I do put out a dish of water that I change every day when it's summer and it's dry and critters need some water. Advocate for native plants if you're comfortable doing that with your city and your county and the state. State has got a brand new way of funding a whole bunch more native plants and removal of invasive plants. So that's going to be really exciting. Please remove your lawn if you're not using it. We've got a lot of really nice flat species to replace it. And please remove invasive species. I know it feels like it's never ending, but it's a huge help to make sure that the natives have some place to live. So we used to think that parks could save us, that we could just stick all of the native plants and all of wildlife in a park and it would be fine. And with two completely different studies, one from a German study with a variety of different German nature preserves, and one in a separate study in Puerto Rico and one of their nature preserves, we saw similar trends, which is that insects are just there. The populations are crashing. So every one of us can make a difference. Less than 4% of the land in the United States are national parks, state parks, and protected areas. So parks aren't going to save our ecosystems. It's up to us. The butterfly that people are most familiar with across the United States is the monarch. We have our very own population of Western monarchs here in California, and that population has been crashing, even though that population seems to be the only one that so many Californians have ever heard of in terms of needing a specialty plant. The monarch uses milkweed plants, milkweed leaves for their caterpillars. That is true for every butterfly. Every butterfly moth uses a specific set of native plant leaves. And so our ecosystem really needs us to plant those local native plants to feed our caterpillars. San Francisco Estuary Institute had a really interesting study called Making Nature City. And they were funded to do that. And they showed that when you plant native plants and you plant them in little stepping stones, so every backyard, every container on a north-facing balcony can be used to help get wildlife back and forth between the larger spaces where a greater variety of wildlife can live. And taking care of our water, so our lakes and our aquifers and large trees, all of these help sustain wildlife in our urban and suburban areas. Oh, and that report is available for free on their website, both in English and in Spanish. So let's talk edible native plants. I do want to say that in my experience, the two best ways to get people to start planting native plants are to either emphasize how nice the butterflies are, because they're really pretty, or how delicious and unusual native plants are. So we're going to go talk about the delicious edible native plants. I find that just feeding a berry or a little bit of a leaf to someone just expands their mind and shows them that, yes, we have a unique ecosystem. It wants to feed us, and this is how it's going to do it. I've got a 5 sort of tiered scale. There is the top tier, which is, oh my gosh, this flavor is amazing. You will never find it anywhere else. You have to try this. There's the still pretty good scale. Our strawberries just taste like supermarket strawberries because supermarket strawberries have got some of the same genetics. Our hazelnuts taste like hazelnut. There's kind of a meh scale. As far as I'm concerned, manzanita berries taste kind of meh. Clarkia seeds taste kind of meh. Then there's it's disgusting. I'm not going to be covering disgusting. It's coffee berry, it's snowberry. Don't eat those. And then there's just plain poisonous. So again, not going to be talking those either. If you only come away with one piece of information from this presentation, it is the search term you can use in Google or DuckDuckGo to go find out more information about edible native plants. And that search term is ethnobotany, because I cannot tell you how many times I tried to Google native foods and got nowhere. But if you use ethnobotany and you do that in conjunction with your local tribe, which is the Coast Miwok for Marin, then you start to get some interesting information. There's a guy named Daniel Mormon who's got the Native American Ethnobotany book. It has no pictures, it has no maps. It just has lists of what each tribe used for food, for medicine, and for tools. And you can look either way. You can look at it by the tribe, or you can look at it by the plant. He also has this information on a website, but it only just has the information searchable per plant. That continues to be updated by him and by his grad students, because ever since the publication of the book, every once in a while, someone will find yet another piece of information about another plant, about its utility by our local tribes. So we're going to talk about edible native plants. We'll look at some icons and guides. We'll look at Marin's edible native plants. We'll look at it from a landscape perspective, how you would use it in your landscape. So ground cover, so when you take your lawn out, what you can replace it with, shorter plants, shrubs, grasses, and trees. And then we'll talk about container gardening. So these are our, I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment because I can still see. Okay, let me share my screen again. So hold on while I apologize for this. Here we are. So these are our guides. So as with any plant, for instance, a tomato plant, you can only eat the fruit. You should not be eating those leaves. Each one of our native plants also has just portions of that plant that are edible. Every once in a while, we have a plant that is entirely edible, and I will mention that. That is a great plant to have for children's gardens. So these little icons tell us if it's a leaf, a seed nut or seed pod, a bulb or a root, a flower or a fruit. Oh, we have so many delicious native flowers. It's so much fun. We'll also have a note for a number of butterfly and moth caterpillar species that are fed by that plant's leaves per Calscape, which has this information. The little clock is going to tell us if that is a long blooming plant or not. And there's a water use classification of landscape species. It is a specific term used by the landscape industry and by University of California to describe how much water a plant needs. I'm going to call it regular water, but it would also be called Wuckel's medium. So let's talk about these plants. So these are our evergreen shade ground covers. So if you think, oh no, I have a shady garden and my lawn hates it anyway, rip it out, put in some of these. We've got strawberries. The Fragaria chiloensis is the one that is in the supermarket strawberry. It's genetics. So the Fragaria vesca is the woodland strawberry. It does well on both sand and clay. Fragaria chiloensis only does well on sandy soil. I have clay. I only garden in clay. Everything I know about sand plants, I've heard from someone else. So I have not tasted a Fragaria chiloensis, only the woodland. Wild ginger. So that is not a plant for me, but it keeps being in my presentations about edible plants because I grow it anyway. I've got a very shady seep. Wild ginger is an understory plant in the redwood forest, in the coastal redwood forest ecosystem. So you guys can grow this if you've got redwoods, if you've got enough, if you have a redwood there and you've got all that lovely loam and you've got all that lovely water, wild ginger is going to be really happy. And it's so pretty. It's got these dark green evergreen leaves and it's the roots that are edible and it tastes like ginger. So it's not in the classic ginger family, but it tastes sort of hot and spicy. You can eat it raw, you can put it in soups, you can make tea out of it. It's delicious. Just buy a little clump, put it in the ground, wait till the clump gets bigger, and then you can start harvesting some. So the dwarf Oregon grape, the Berberius aquifolium repens. Berberius aquifolium is native to you. I don't think the repens is, but it's this gorgeous ground cover, long blooming, winter bloom. So December to February, very, very showy yellow flowers, very attractive to those early arriving bees, like the bumblebees that are just hatching now, and very attractive to hummingbirds that would like to stay in our gardens year round, and dark green, evergreen, shiny leaves. Those leaves are a little bit spiky, so this isn't going to be something you would want to use as a ground cover if you've got a lot of kids or you have grandkids visiting occasionally. But if you did want to, say, prevent some wildlife from showing up in your garden, this is going to be uncomfortable for them to walk on, so yay. Then there's Yerba Buena, which is what the San Francisco chapter of California Native Plant Society is named after. Yerba Buena is this beautiful green plant, does really well in fog. It just loves fog, does well in sand and on clay, and it's delicious. It's in the mint family. So the leaves are edible and it's got a very mild sort of oregano mint flavor, delicious raw. I use it on top. I stew squash and then put a little yogurt on that and then put this on top rather than use regular mint. It's delicious. And eventually we'll also get to the trees where we get to talk about the fact that you guys got a native pine. And so you could use your native pine nuts plus Yerba Buena to make your own very delicious native local pesto. Got a little bit of envy going on here, but it's okay. You have pine nuts. I don't. At least I don't have them where they're native. So the dog violet is a ridiculously important plant. I love the fact that Calscape now has so many of the butterfly associations associated with these plants. These plants, by the way, are all deciduous ground covers. And you might think, well, that's a little weird. So it's not something perhaps you might want in your front to replace your lawn. But if you've got an area in the back that's underneath the tree or underneath some shrubs where you don't mind the fact that you're going to be losing some leaves, it's great. And the dog violet, Viola adunca, is a really important plant. Those leaves are delicious. To me, they taste just like the yellow violet, the Viola pedunculata leaves. I grow them both. Yellow violet needs a lot more. Dog violet is very drought tolerant. It is a grassland plant. Yellow violet is one of those transition plants between the riparian and the grassland. Although I think you also have it in the redwood ecosystem. Dog violet isn't just used by 20 different butterfly and moth caterpillars. It is, for reasons I have no idea, used by 6 federally endangered California caterpillars from butterflies from Oregon to San Diego. It's just this great coastal plant. It does grow in clay as well as sand. And it feeds a ridiculous number of butterfly and important butterfly caterpillars. So please, if you plant nothing else from this presentation, please plant the dog violet. It's easy, it's summer deciduous. If you forget to water it, or you just don't water it, it'll go away in the summer, it'll come back with the rains. It's delicious, it's important. Why wouldn't you grow it? And I am seeing it more often now in the trade. I'm seeing it at all of the different native nurseries that I go to. So I'm really relieved to see it out there. It used to be hard to find, and now it's easier. Miner's lettuce, if you are a new gardener and brand new to gardening on the West Coast, where we have these very dry summers, please consider growing miner's lettuce. This is the easiest native plant to grow. It's right up there with poppy seeds. It's just easy and it's delicious. And why would you ever grow any other kind of lettuce when you can grow miner's lettuce and it's delicious? And it's got a cousin called Claytonia sibirica, which is candy flower. It's also delicious. Candy flowers, Claytonia sibirica, is native to you. It's not to me. I grow it anyway, and it's tasty. Miner's lettuce is just, it's great. It will spread itself through seeds in an area. I wouldn't necessarily eat it the first year. Self-seed, it'll be everywhere. It'll be everywhere. It'll be fine. As soon as the rains stop, it goes away. It's delicious. Pacific blackberry has got thorns. I have a tendency to not like plants with thorns. So I don't grow this, and I haven't tasted the blackberries, but I do hear that they're good. It does need a bit more water. It's an understory plant and for the redwood and the mixed evergreen forest. So worth trying, important for caterpillars, and one of these days I want to try the fruit. So if anyone's tried that fruit, do let me know. That's one of the things I haven't eaten. So sagebrush is a great plant. It is used as a mill plant, but cooked with just yummy. You can make tea out of it. You can add it instead of sage to of it that are ground covers. So canyon gray and Montara. Montara does specifically really well in rocky soils. Yeah, sagebrush, self-heal, and sage all do beautifully in sun. And so these are all be lovely sunny area ground covers, where the others were for shady areas. So shorter plants, so not quite ground covers, but a little taller. Still, if you are just replacing your front lawn or back lawn, and you just want to have something short to pop up, I love our onions. California's got 70 different onions. It is just such a fun plant. The onion is an entirely edible plant. The entire allium family is entirely edible. The bulbs, the leaves, the seeds, the flowers. And if you haven't had a chance to taste those before, it's just so much fun. You can take those onion seeds and put them on avocado toast. You can take the flowers and you can put them in cocktails or in salads. They've got a light oniony taste and they're so yummy. I only grow a few different ones. I want to grow all 70, although I'm not quite sure where, just because they all taste different, just like the rest of the allium family. So leeks, shallots, garlic, Vidalia onions, yellow onions, white onions, they are all different tasting. Well, so are the California onions. I have to admit, I haven't tasted the onion bulb just because I enjoy eating the flowers and the seeds so much. One of these days, I keep promising myself I will try it. Our local sunflower, which I believe just grows on some roadsides for you guys, but close enough. It's local to you. It's not local to me. Helianthus annuus, as we remember from the specialist bee chart, this is the sunflower family, the Helianthus family is really important. So if you've got a sunny space to put, honestly, a tallish, bright flower, it needs full sun. Those onion, the whole onion family needs full sun too. California poppies prefer sun, and coyote mint is only happy in full sun. I've got mine in part sun, and it's just perennially cranky. I know someone who's growing in coyote mint in a container in full sun. It's a very happy plant. Onions, the one leaf onion and the coyote mint are both going to be great in containers, by the way. Bulbs, they're great. Most annuals, but not sunflower and California poppies. They both have a bit of a taproot, and then coyote mint's got a fairly short root system. Coyote mint is really interesting. I am not very fond of minty flavors. Yerba Buena is about as minty as I get. Coyote mint is extremely minty. If you love mint, go grow that. I mean, I grow it for the bees because the bees love the flowers as well as the hummingbirds, but the flower is really minty and the leaf is really minty. I have tasted it and yeah, very minty. And California poppy is really fun. There's, I think, 500 species of poppies worldwide. 3 of them, the poppy seeds are hallucinogenic. Ours is not one of those. But if you take those poppy seeds and eat them, they already taste just delicious. They taste like, to me, any other poppy seed I've had. They've got that yummy toasty flavor. If you need to take a drug test for work, it will show up that you were using a poppy product. So yeah, don't do that within a couple of weeks of needing to take. I've heard that some people can use it to make them a little bit sleepy. Tinctures of the poppy seeds. I have actually tried that. It doesn't work for me, but your mileage may vary. It is just delicious right out of the pod. We have got so many delicious native fruit bushes. You have got more currants than I have. I have only tasted the Ribes sanguineum glutinosum because there seems to be a lot of that in public spaces here. I didn't realize that it was edible or a great plant back when I was planting my garden, and I no longer have room for it. It is a wonderful pink flowered plant. It blooms from December to February, so a really important winter plant for those early arriving bees and for the hummingbirds that want to live in your garden. And the flowers just look like pink chandeliers. Each one of the currants has got a different tasting berry. I did just plant the Malvaceum and I want to plant the Menzies. Those are the other 2 that are native to me, but you've got a bunch more, so go plant them all. It'll be so much fun. Long blooming, edible fruit, over 100 different butterflies and moths, so a really important plant to have in your garden. And I mean, who can resist? It's got a sort of an interesting sweet tart flavor. So if you made something sweet, like roasted some parsnip and did a puree with that, and then put these berries on top, that would be a lot of fun. The barberry is interesting plant. We talked about the ground cover before, and I realized I did not describe what the fruit tastes like. You've got a couple that are native to you, Berbera spinata and nervosa. It's a very tart flavor. So if you like Sour Patch Kids, you might really like this. There is a very famous Persian dish called zeresh polo, where dried barberries are used on rice and then matched with some protein or some stew. And it's a really delicious, friendly, pectin filled, so you can use it in pie. If you want to make, say, a rhubarb pie, you don't want to grow rhubarb, you could use this instead with a great deal of sugar or maple syrup. Evergreen leaves, dark green, long blooming yellow flowers, and those delicious sour berries. I have seen a robin performatively walk back and forth in front of a barberry bush to protect it from me. And I thought robin was shaped like a softball. It looked like it had been eating berries all day. It's just a bird magnet. It's a really fun bush. And it's good on both sand and on clay. The currants, you're going to want to check each one of them in terms of which one uses different kinds or needs different kinds of soil. Salal is really fun. I grew that for a while. I tried growing it twice. I have clay soil, and it turns out it doesn't like clay soil. It did live long enough to bloom and to fruit, and the fruit was delicious, but it kept dying. And I thought, am I just not watering it enough? I had one near a seep, and then I put the next one in a seep, still didn't live. And then I saw one at Golden Gate Park that was 3 foot by 3 foot, covered with berries and on sand. So if you have sandy soil, you can grow salal, and it's delicious. So you should do that. Yum. Oh, and shade friendly. Shade friendly, sand friendly, delicious. Huckleberry, you've got a couple of different vacciniums. As you go north along the West Coast, more and more, you just get more and more vaccinium species. Vaccinium is sort of the blueberry family. If huckleberries and East Coast blueberries are cousins. And if blueberries were having Thanksgiving, they would invite huckleberry over. And as you go north to Oregon and then to Washington State and British Columbia, you get more and more and more vaccinium species. You have got 2 vaccinium species. I only have 1, so I've only tasted vaccinium ovatum. I love this plant. Shade friendly, needs a little bit more water. So it's a redwood understory plant. And I believe it's also a mixed evergreen forest for you guys. And it's so tasty. It grows really slowly though. I have a 13-year-old huckleberry that at this point is 2 feet tall and 4 feet wide. I hear they're supposed to be 12 feet at some point. I don't know how many decades that will take, but I'm willing to wait. Evergreen, showy. You can shape it if you want to have one of those clipped hedges. Again, I'm way too lazy to do that, but tasty, shade friendly, needs a little bit of extra water. I've got 3 of them, and why not? They're delicious. Salmonberry. So salmonberry is in the raspberry family. And interestingly, it doesn't travel the way the raspberry family does, but it is very, it's very thorny. It has got spectacular showy pink flowers and very, very tasty sort of yellow-orange fruit. Mine is only happy in a seep. I've got 3, each one of them is in a seep. I had a 4th outside of a seep, and it just didn't make it through one of our droughts. So it's gonna want water, and it's thorny, but, oh, and it's shade friendly, but it needs a tiny little bit of light to get to the leaves. It'll bloom, but it won't fruit without some sunlight. So our Pacific blackberry is raspberry family, the salmonberry is raspberry family, and thimbleberry is raspberry family. So if you want raspberry family, but you've got kids or other domestic people who don't like thorns, then thimbleberry is perfect, not thorny. Big, friendly, soft leaves. It's deciduous, salmonberry is deciduous, Rubus ursinus, Pacific blackberry, they're all deciduous, but at least thimbleberry does not have thorns. It will travel though, it will just, I watched it move underneath a walkway and pop up the other side. It's just charming. I have never seen them in farmers markets, and I can't imagine being able to find them in a farmers market. They have that weird sort of beigey, light pink color the day before they're ripe. Then they're that bright stoplight red the day they're ripe. And then the next day they just dry up. So the only way you're going to be able to eat these is if you grow them yourselves or you look at a public park. They're delicious. So delicious. Can't recommend them highly enough. If you have a very formal garden though, and you've got a set of formal expectations, try to convince your local park to put it in there anyway, because it's not going to be, you may not be happy with it in a really formal looking garden. We do have some lovely herby shrubs. Hummingbird sage and black sage are both local to Marin. Hummingbird sage is the only one that's local sage to me. Hummingbird sage is just a weird looking plant. It's got enormous leaves. It likes a lot of shade. It tends to be very low growing, except it's got these huge spikes, flower spikes in the spring. And those bright pink flowers, they taste like fruit punch. They're delicious. And you can take just a little bit of a leaf and cook with it. The leaf for hummingbird sage is much more fruity flavored than any other sage that I've found. Black sage is native to you and to the East Bay and to the South Bay, and for some reason not to me, Salvia mellifera. It's got a sort of that light, pale, sort of white, gray, maybe tinge of blue or purple in it. Just an incredible plant, covered with bees and hummingbirds and butterflies when it's in bloom. It's got very spicy flavored flowers, and the sage leaves are more that sort of standard, closer to a French sage, so easier to cook with. And so I use that in pasta sauces. So monkey flower savory is not a monkey flower. It is a Chenopodium. And it's really interesting. It is not native to Marin. I am including it anyway, because if you love minty flavors, but all you have is shade, if you had sun, you could grow coyote mint, but if all you have is shade, then monkey flower savory is what you want to grow. It does need a little bit of extra water in my garden. It's sort of a 2-foot tall bush, so also a lot taller than coyote mint. And it's got those great tubular orange flowers. And so the hummingbirds will fight everyone to get near them. It's a great plant. There is a grass seed that is edible, blue wild rye, Elmus glaucus. I have not eaten it myself, but if anyone has eaten it, do let me know. I would love to know what that tastes like. So let's talk fruit trees. Yes, you can have an orchard of native fruit trees. Blue elderberry is one of the easiest plants to grow. I was talking earlier about what a slow grower huckleberry is. Well, blue elderberry, I have not sat in front of one to watch it grow, but I'm pretty sure I could. I put one in a public space last year. It more than doubled in size as a 1 gallon. I've got a 13-year-old one that I planted near my 13-year-old huckleberry, and it is 22 feet. And it is still growing. It's going to get to about 30 feet, about 20 foot wide. It is deciduous. I happen to have it in a formal looking garden. I love how it attracts tiny insects, because it's got those very showy white flowers, but they're very shallow. So little tiny insects can show up and get a drink without drowning in nectar. Excuse me. And so the birds are attracted to the tiny insects because they eat them like little tiny tortilla chips. And then the fruit shows up, which is delicious for us. It's sweet, it's delicious, and the birds love it too. So they come for the insects, they stay for the berries, plus the leaves support different caterpillars. It is just a brilliant tree to have. And I love having it in the landscape. And so I've started putting it in public spaces near me too, because I want more people to be able to eat that fruit. And it's a very heavy bearing. I mean, it gets pollinated, so it produces berries even in drought years. It does find it's a really heavy fruit producer. The year where we had 8 inches, when we just finished, I still had a ton of fruit. It is, for reasons I do not understand, considered Wucal's medium. It behaves like Wucal's low in my garden. It just doesn't need any extra effort. I do know people who have put it into narrow spaces and then are unhappy. You can trim it up. It is shrubby. You can trim it up so you can see the trunk so it looks more like a classic tree. It is a multi-trunked tree, but you're not going to have any success in hedging it or topping it. It will laugh at you and just think that you were kidding. It's like, no, you definitely want me to be full size. No. So definitely only put it in space where it's going to be okay. We're 30 by 20, 30 feet tall, 20 feet wide. So I have tasted neither of the cherries that are native to you, the Prunus marginata and the Virginiana demisa. I just stuck Virginiana demisa in a public space a couple of years ago, and I'm looking forward to it providing fruit, but I haven't tasted it yet. So if anybody has tasted that fruit, if you could put information about it in the chat to let us know whether or not it's worth eating. It's always fun to grow for wildlife, but can I also feed it to people that I want to convince them to grow native plants? Over 200 different caterpillar species supported, so it's a really big deal. There is a native madrone, the Arbutus menzies, for some reason in San Francisco, our city, and the Friends of the Urban Forest that plant almost all of San Francisco's street trees insist on planting the European Arbutus marina, and none of the wildlife will eat the berries, which is really disappointing. And every time I go hiking and I see an Arbutus menzies, it has no fruit. And I don't think it's because it didn't fruit. I think it's because the bird stripped it. So what I've read about it in ethnobotany research is that the fruit is edible to people, but only a few. Don't really know what that means. So if any of you have tasted Arbutus menzies fruit, if you could let us know in the chat, that would be great. And the osoberry tree. The osoberry tree is another lovely tree that only grows on sand. So I have not managed to get out to an osoberry tree in someone else's garden and taste that fruit yet. I do hear that it's worth tasting, but I have not tasted it myself. Anybody else has an osoberry tree or has tasted the fruit, please let us know. So yeah, 3 out of the fruit trees on this, 4 fruit trees on this list, I have not tasted the fruit. I've only tasted and grow the blue elderberry because it's delicious. These other ones are likely a lot of fun to have in the landscape too. Nut trees. We have got native nut trees here in California. So in Marin, you have got the native bishop pine, and all pine seeds are edible. All of them, all the California pine seeds, all the pine seeds throughout the Americas, the pine seeds in Europe, the pine seeds in Asia, all pine seeds. If the Latin name starts with pinus, that seed is edible, which means you could make pesto out of it, or you could toast it and put it on cereal or toast, avocado toast. I don't have a native pine. We do have lots of pine trees here in San Francisco, but they were planted by people and they're not native here. You have a native pine. And so I'm somewhat jealous. You have a bishop pine forest. In fact, you've got a pine forest plant community. And so if you've got a bishop pine, you've got all kinds of lovely things that will grow with it that are edible. And the leaves, not only are the nuts edible, but you can also use the leaves in tea, the needles in tea. Be sure that you are opening a pine cone. Cypress seeds, not edible. Redwood seeds, not edible, at least not according to any of the ethnobotany research that I've looked into. Pines, yes, not cypress, not redwoods, just pines. Also, there's 2 hazelnuts. I can only grow Corylus cornuta californica, and I do grow it. It's beautiful. Deciduous tree, gets to about 18 feet. Mine is 13 years old, like everything else in my garden. And it's shorter than the blue elderberry. It's maybe 12, 15 feet. Not as tall as the blue elderberry. It's not to its full height yet, though. You do need 2 to get nuts. And you guys have got the cornuta as well as the cornuta californica. Mine needs a little extra water. Mine is really happy, mostly in shade. It gets sun for about 3 weeks because the garden is cut into the side of a hill, and with some tall buildings, it just is set up so that it does get a little bit of sun, but not very often. So I'm not sure how it would be in full, complete dark shade, but it does pretty well with 48 or 49 weeks of shade. Delicious nuts. I do have to argue with the scrub jays over the nuts, but they're tasty. And I haven't tasted the cornuta. So if you have tasted a Coriolis cornuta nut, do let us know in the chat how that is. I have also not tasted the Northern California walnut. It's the Northern California walnut. It does have a range all the way down to Southern California. There is a separate Southern California walnut that I grew down in Southern California that I did not realize was mine until I was about to leave. So I never tasted those nuts either. So do let us know how those taste. That is a wind pollinated plant, as is the California hazelnut. So those are great plants, good plants for caterpillars. They're not going to be great bee plants because they're wind pollinated. Nonetheless, great plants to have in the landscape because you want to have edible plants. I don't know much about growing walnuts because they are not native here. So you might want to take a look into that just to see how that works. I have heard that for walnut trees in California, that English walnut was imported and walnut from the East Coast, the Appalachian walnut, the black walnut, was imported here. And so a lot of the walnut species, because they are wind pollinated, are really mixtures. So I would go to a native nursery and just get the most native walnut that you can. Very tall tree. And lots of fun to be able to grow your own walnuts. So in the unusual flavor category, we have the California bay laurel. When it's a little baby tree, so sometime before it's 40, you're going to be able to cook with the leaves. The leaves have got a fruitier flavor than your European laurels. So you can use it anywhere you would use that. It is a very, very strongly flavored plant, though, the leaf is. And so definitely go rub the leaf, maybe taste a little bit of it. If you get a headache, don't plant that plant. Some people really are sensitive to it. And I want to make sure you don't end up with a plant in your landscape that you don't get along with. I happen to love it. It's delicious. And if you've got one that's older than 40 years old, it'll start to make nuts. And there's a very complicated recipe about how to prepare that nut to be eaten. That involves, it's in the avocado family, and where the skin and the meat would be on an avocado, peel that off. It is edible. It's extremely powerfully flavored. It's in its very own unusual flavor. And I haven't figured out how to cook with the meat yet. The nut needs to outgas. So just sit on a shady shelf somewhere for about 6 months, lose some oils, then you go roast it till it's almost black and then pound it, and it'll taste like a combination of chocolate and coffee and hazelnut. So you want this in your landscape if you've got room for it. It's just a great tree with an amazing fruit. And until it's old enough to have nuts, you've got those delicious leaves that you can use. So the California torreya, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. I have not eaten that nut. I do see ethnobotany research that says that it is edible. So if anyone has tasted that, you could add information into the chat. On Calscape, it does say that it needs a bit more water. It's Wukal's medium. In fact, it would even take more water than that if I could get it. So another plant that would take a little bit more water, but if you've got sort of a dampish area, that could be a tree for you. So many lovely trees that you have that provide nuts up in Marin. Only, again, mildly jealous, mildly envious. So let's talk about container planting with edible native plants. We've got a bunch of annuals that have got edible seeds. So the Goldfields, and the tidy tips have both got edible seeds. These are just very cheery plants. Put them someplace sunny, put them in they're shallow rooted annuals. They're great. Chia sage is a shallow rooted annual. If what you have is a container in your sunny spot, then chia sage is the sage for you. It's entirely edible. The leaves, the flowers, the seeds. In the mint family, great plant, gorgeous, really brilliant blue flower. Bees love it, and then it's tasty. Miner's lettuce we talked about earlier, very shade friendly, lots of fun to grow. Red maids will only grow on sand. And I've got a friend who's growing it in Southern California on sand, and she says that it just keeps spreading. I can't grow it on clay, not at all. So I have not tasted it, but I have heard that the leaves are tasty, and then it's got that absolutely gorgeous, spectacular flower. I wasn't going to talk about meh flavored plants. Clarkia seeds are edible. They taste kind of meh. They don't have a lot of flavor, but they're absolutely gorgeous, and they're bee friendly, and they bloom for months, and they bloom in the summer. And so I really like to have Clarkia in my garden, and the unguiculata, which is the top right plant. There's a lot of different kinds of Clarkia. Most of the Clarkias need full sun. Unguiculata can take quite a bit of shade. When you buy a package of unguiculata, it's going to come with the sort of variety of colors. It'll be that coral and pink, purple. I even saw white and kind of that interesting reddish color. We have a bunch of bulbs. I did talk about onion earlier because I am obsessed with it. Ethereal Spear and Elegant Brodiea both not only have edible bulbs, but also edible flowers. They both taste like crispy lettuce, so they don't have a lot of sweet flavor, but they're so pretty. Ethereal Spear blooms the first 2 weeks of May for me, and then Elegant Brodiea blooms the last 2 weeks of May, or right after Ethereal Spear. And so if I can get people to walk through my garden in May, I feed them flowers. It's so much fun. I have not eaten any of these bulbs. I just won't do it. If I can eat a flower or some seeds, I'd rather do that. So Mariposa lilies and blue dicks, they're bulb only, not the flowers, not the seed, but they're gorgeous. And so they're planted more for wildlife. I gave myself the admittedly somewhat ridiculous excuse that I could dig them up as earthquake food. But if you need a ridiculous excuse, please feel free to use that. As far as I know, it's just, it's just the luteus, just the yellow calicortus where the bulb is edible, not the albus. The albus is local to me. I believe the luteus is local to you. So when we're thinking about food, let's think about that edible native plant buffet for people sort of year round, and a year round bee buffet. It's not that every bee will be in your landscape year round, but I find that there's some bee or other in my landscape most of the time. So I want to make sure that there's always something for them to eat. I want adult butterflies to eat, and I want hummingbirds to eat. As long as we're planting native plants, we're going to have their leaves, and those are going to feed caterpillars, but this is how we feed everybody else. So here is a year-long buffet for people, where we've got sage leaves, Yerba Buena leaves, miner's lettuce leaves. In the winter, the currant starts to bloom in November, where it's an early spring or a late spring fruit. Coyote mint is providing us late summer blooms that we can eat, and that late winter leaves, the monkey flower saber, we can eat those in the winter. So there are things that we can get from our garden in the winter and still eat. And then starting in the spring, when so many California native plants begin to bloom and then go to seed and fruit, we've got our edible flowers, the onion, the chia sage, the brodiea, the ethereal spear. If I could also shove it onto this chart. The strawberry, it's just the fruit that's edible for that, but it will start blooming in the spring, and then you'll get berries in early summer. Thimbleberry, last 2 weeks of June, I just stand out there and argue with the scrub jays and the robins and the rest of the birds so that I can eat thimbleberry. There's hazelnut production starts in the summer. We've got salmonberry in the summer. Huckleberries tend to be July and August. Blue elderberries, summerberry. It's just really fun. Our cherry, that's a hollyleaf cherry picture, it's a sand plant, so I haven't tasted it, but it made my chart anyway. And then poppy seeds, as soon as they're dry. If the seeds are still green, don't eat them. Wait until they're brown. When you notice that those cute little curved seed pods begin to break open, that's when it's time to go out there with an envelope or something and just put a bunch of dried seed pods in there and then let them open and help yourself to some poppy seeds. They're delicious. Bee buffet. I'm going to add manzanita to barberry and to currant in terms of things that are blooming in late winter, December, January, and February. It's a great bee plant, great hummingbird plant. I don't happen to like manzanita berry flavors. I haven't tasted a lot of them. I don't happen to like the flavor of the one that I grow, but your mileage may vary. Willows, ceanothus, cherries, maples, these are all incredibly important caterpillar plants, and they bloom Marchish, March to May. And so those leaves are feeding hundreds of different caterpillar species while the flowers are feeding all of our bees that are out. And then May is just when so many of us have got so much blooming in our garden. And so the top favorites for my bees are the lupine, Phacelia, bee plant, and strawberry. And throughout the summer, there's buckwheat, there's coyote bush. There are long blooming plants that bloom through the summer. And I just strongly recommend that you put in coyote bush and gumweed and poppies and seaside daisy. Oh my goodness, that thing blooms. I put in a 1 gallon last year in a public space. It bloomed a 1 gallon from January to August. It's not edible for people, but it just ends up being covered with bees and insects, and then the birds show up, and so everybody gets to eat. Adult butterflies do seem to like those sort of wide landing pads like the seaside daisy's got, the cherry, the woolly sunflowers, phacelias. So be sure to, you can use native plants to feed those adult butterflies nectar, as well as feeding their caterpillars. And I realize that hummingbirds are more generalist feeders. They can take nectar from just about anything that's got nectar, but they also like to eat tiny little gnats. So if you ever see them just sort of going back and forth in space and you don't know what they're doing, they're eating tiny little gnats. And so it's their version of a tiny, tiny, tiny little crunchy tortilla chip. And that's what gives them protein so that they can have good eggshells for their babies. So they need that protein in addition to nectar. And those gnats and other tiny insects are best fed by our native plants. And so these are some of the hummingbird favorites, manzanita, barberry, currant being really important during our current winter months. So let's talk about some resources. We're going to talk about native plant lists and CalScape's plant selection tool, and where to find native plants, and the CalFlora tool, and some ethnobotany and edible plant references, and a naturalist so that you can explore local plants and wildlife. In San Francisco, we put a bunch of plant lists together because I really like to just do a plant list once and then be able to send it to people. It's available for free on our website, and a lot of these are now illustrated. Almost everything that's native to me is also native to me in San Francisco is also native to you in Marin. Plus you've got all these extra delicious plants that I'm only lightly envious about. So we've got edible plant lists, butterfly, caterpillar plant list, hummingbirds, bees, long blooming, shade, color, plant communities, sidewalks, containers, and for landscape design, so specifically hedges and ground covers. CNPS Marin has also got some really great information on your website, so I wanted to include that as well. If you haven't used CalScape, I strongly recommend you do it. It's got a great way to go back and forth between information about every single one of California's native plants, plus all of our native cultivars, plus the relationships between the butterflies and the plants. And there's currently information for every plant about which nurseries carry that plant and a map of those nurseries. Very useful. It does have a 10-mile radius, so it always gives me a list of things that include sand plants and rock plants and serpentine plants that do not necessarily apply to me. San Francisco is 7 miles by 7 miles. We have 6 kinds of soil, so it's definitely double check it. So if you're on clay, you're unlikely to be able to grow that oso-berry or salal. So even if Calscape says that you've got it, just double check with your soil. If you do not know what your soil is, you can always go outside with a spoon and a takeout container, take some of your soil, put it in a takeout container, and take it to any nursery, native nursery, any nursery that would help you. So I don't think Home Depot will necessarily know what your soil is from you giving it some examples, but any other nursery should be able to figure that out for you and help you. Oh, and your property may actually cover more than one kind of soil. There's a school near me that's got about half clay and half sand. So I've got coastal dune scrub plants for the sand part, and we've got oak woodland plants for the clay part, because so your property may very well have multiple different kinds of soils. So if you try a plant that works just fine in one part, but it's not working fine in the other, just double check the soil type. CalFlora's also got a great way of telling you what is native to your area of Marin. And that's what Kristen Jacob told me, and I couldn't figure out how to make that work. But I do use CalFlora's bloom period tool, and it is outstanding. It is a lot more precise than Calscape's, and I really want that. If you are looking for a particular, well, I want it because I want that year-round flower buffet to feed my hummingbird and bees, but you may want it to have a specific flower color, blooming for a birthday or anniversary or a celebration. And so this is a very useful tool, in addition to also showing you what the range of that plant is. Larner Seeds is a wonderful site, and they are really great about providing information about edible native plants and selling those seeds and some of the bulbs. Because Judith Larner Lowry also wrote a book about California foraging. There are 3 good books about foraging in California. There's Judith Larner Lowry's California Foraging, there's the Bay Area Forager, and there's Foraging in California. All good. I recommend that if you want to go try a bit of a native plant before you buy it, that you go to a native nursery where that plant has got a name tag and is properly identified. My concern with even a well-signed park, and there are very few of those. Golden Gate Park, the Arboretum, the San Francisco Arboretums got pretty decent signage, but if you've got plants that are right next to each other and you don't know what you're looking at and you choose the wrong plant leaf, that could be a very unpleasant day for you. Some of our plants, the lupines specifically, are just very, very bad for you. So don't eat those. So that's why I recommend that you go to a native nursery, or you find someone who's got a garden or certain of what they just put in their public space, and go out and eat with them, and try a berry or a bit of leaf, and then go grow it yourself. We need more natives in our landscape, and it would be great if we planted more. So please don't go out and forage an entire meal. But if you want to, if you're sure of what you're tasting and you're with someone who hasn't tasted that plant before, feeding somebody one berry or a bit of leaf will still be fine for the environment, especially if you can get them to plant that plant. And then if you've never read Gary Nabin, he is just a wonderful writer. He is in Arizona, and he specifically works on desert agriculture, and he has written a bunch of wonderful books about growing food in the desert. And he's just a charming writer, lots and lots of books. Every one of them is wonderful. I realize that does not apply to Marin, and it doesn't apply to San Francisco, but he's still a wonderful writer. iNaturalist, if you haven't used this, this is a citizen science application. So you can go identify plants, you can identify animals. I strongly recommend, if you are not certain of what a plant is, to not just let iNaturalist or any other plant ID tell you that it is okay to eat something. You need to have a plant with a sign on it, or be with someone who knows what they're doing. I was looking at some iNaturalist observations the other day, and iNaturalist had given someone who's new to the tool and must be new to California plants. They had given them, I guess, a choice between the California buckeye and the Northern California walnut. They chose walnut. It was a buckeye. A buckeye will kill you. So don't eat that. Make sure you know what you're eating. On the other hand, if what you want to do is go see what that plant looks like, go use iNaturalist for that. It'll also help you identify bees and birds and all kinds of wildlife. You can track the coyotes in San Francisco because of iNaturalist. You can track where our butterflies are. I will say that for our federally endangered butterflies, they do not give you a precise location because there are so few of them left. So if you're wondering, hey, why is that? I was going to use an endangered butterfly as an example in iNaturalist once for a presentation, and realized, no, they've got these big weird circles because they don't want you to go find the last 16 butterflies of something. It's a great project. It's run out of the California Academy of Sciences worldwide, so you can use it to investigate things anywhere. It is a free citizen science project, so be careful, don't reuse the password there. They're doing the best they can, but it is a free service. So they may not have quite the cybersecurity that some projects will have. So thank you for planting native plants. And thank you to all of the people whose pictures I used, and all of the professionals whose information I used, and all of the people who reviewed my presentation. So let's take some questions. Oops.
Okay, I want to just pull out some of the questions that were in the chat.
Sure.
One of them was regarding ground covers and which of them could be walked upon.
Oh, really good question. So if you're going to enjoy walking on it, do not plant a barberry. But I walk on my strawberry, I walk on Yerba Buena, you can walk on the ginger. You can walk on the sage, and the sagebrush is a little bit woody. The fronds themselves are soft, but the branches are a little bit woody. If you really want to walk on a native ground cover, I've got two for you, and neither of them are edible. One is red fescue. You can mow that. And the other one, weirdly, is yarrow. You can mow yarrow, and it's really soft. They're both soft, they're both hardy. I defy you to kill them. Unfortunately, you can't eat them. So red fescue and yarrow, which is Accolea millefolium. Red fescue is Festuca rubra. And I know yarrow's local to you, and I think Festuca rubra probably is. What else?
Yes. Jay wonders, how much light does the dog violet need?
So mine gets almost none. I haven't experimented with it in deep shade yet. I did just stick it underneath a mature coffee berry to see how well that's going to do. But mine gets almost no sun. It does get a little bit of sun, and I think July. But no, actually at that point, it doesn't have many leaves left because it's summer deciduous. I've had really good, I've had it in a couple of different places and just put it in some public spaces in some pretty dark areas. So go ahead and experiment with that in really deep shade, because it's going to be fun. The one thing I wouldn't do is I would not put that in full sun. it really is an understory plant and it wants some shade. If you think of it from the point of view of a plant, you've got these trees and you've got the taller shrubs, you've got the shorter shrubs, and you've got the shorter flowers. If you're a dog violet, if you're really so many of these ground covers, you're underneath a lot of different things. You do not need or expect a lot of sun.
That's good. There were lots of comments about elderberries and elderflowers, saying that they do make delicious cordials and flavorings for teas and such. Making delicious, so someone uses it to flavor their vodka. Someone asked about boiling the fruit, and Jay suggests that yes, the berries need to be boiled. They could be mildly irritating when uncooked. So
I have not found that myself, but that's really good to know. I just eat them off the tree because they're tasty. And there's so many that I don't have to really fight with the birds the way I do for the thimbleberry. But that's, yeah, I haven't found them irritating, but that's good to know if there's a potential. So the bay laurel leaves don't irritate me either. And if there's a potential for irritation, though, it's really good to know that they can be boiled and used as flavoring. I have heard of people who will take the flowers and put them in batter and then fry them as pancakes. That sounds delicious and way too much work for me. I'm really more of a stand out in the garden and eat off the bushes kind of girl.
Okay. Leslie comments that the bark of madrone is wonderful as an infusion.
Ooh, bark.
So, the bark. So you'll just have to see. Oh, here's another warning about eating elderberry fruit. So eat them carefully until you see how you react to them.
Good point.
Jay also mentions that she's eaten arbutus menzies, but not in great quantities. Tasty off the ground in winter. They need to be really ripe, really ripe.
Okay.
Okay. I picked some and put them in my wreath for the wreath masters, but I didn't give them a taste. They didn't look really, they looked pithy, if anything. So
yeah.
Someone's asking how to get pine nuts out. I think you explained. You sort of have to.
I think I did not actually explain how to get them out. So California pines, so many of them are what's called a closed cone, because a lot of our plants expect to go through fires periodically, including our pine trees. Our redwoods, the cypresses, the pine trees, ceanothus, so many of these expect their seed pods to go through fire. So you're going to need to warm that. And I have not done that. I have seen things on the internet that explain how to do it, but I have not done that myself. If anyone else has done that or has a reference for it, if you would please add that to the chat, that would be really helpful. But you will have to warm it to get it to open.
So I had a friend that wanted to grow some bishop pine on her property. And so we collected a variety of cones, and she just baked them in the oven, and that popped them open. Hopefully it didn't cook them too much so that her seeds will germinate, because that's what she wanted them for. But if you were going to eat them, it wouldn't hurt if they got roasted a little bit.
It's delicious.
So,
There was one question about how to tell the difference between the native and the Himalayan blackberry. And I can just say that the stalks of the native blackberry are much more slender, and the thorns are more like bristles than the big hooked thorns that you get on the Himalayan blackberry. So those are the easiest ways to tell them apart: the slender stems and the bristle-like thorns.
Yeah, I just use the thorns myself. It's like, oh, that's a horrible thorn. That's a Himalayan blackberry.
Right.
Oh, that's a tiny little thorn. Yeah, it's the Pacific blackberry. I just haven't been around the Pacific blackberry when it's in fruit, unfortunately.
Oh, I have. I've tasted blackberries and they are really quite lovely. But it needs quite a bit of sun. I mean, I have blackberry all over my yard here in Inverness, but
Really?
they seldom flower and they never produce berries because it's just too shady. So
Oh, that's good to know. Oh, I've got this in the shade. Okay, well, I need to move that then. Again, I haven't grown it myself because I don't like thorny plants. What kind of soil do you have that it's growing?
decomposed granite.
Oh, okay.
Several comments about bay laurels and how the bay leaves, as you said, are quite strong, much stronger than the supermarket ones, and a slightly different taste. But also mentions that the nuts are amazing roasted. Someone also says that they've eaten the meat on the bay nuts and have also roasted them and used them, added them to coffee.
Ooh.
So let's see. Here's another comment about island pitcher plant, Lepicina fragrans, as a substitute for culinary sage. Wonderful flavor.
That's interesting. I grow that. So Lepicinia fragrans is the Southern California one. I've been looking for the Calcinia, which is the Northern California one, which is native to you and to me. And I'm having trouble finding that in the nursery trade because I had a public space I wanted to add that to.
So David says that is way too strong to use. So you wouldn't want to eat that.
Oh, the Calcinia? Okay.
Yes.
Huh, because I've eaten a little bit of the Lepicinia because it's mint family and I thought I'd give that a try. I thought that was kind of strong. And so I, again, hadn't tried the Calcinia, so it didn't make this presentation. But that's good to know that the Calcinia is too strong to eat.
Okay. People really appreciated the references that you sorted, that you highlighted, and said that it's good to have several, to cross-reference. Then there's always the internet to use. David also talked about the iNaturalist related app on smartphones, Seek, which can help you identify plants out in the field.
So Seek is for children. It's for 12 and under. And so with iNaturalist, you've got a variety of security settings. With Seek, there's only one security setting and it is maximum.
But if you have no idea, it still works.
Oh yeah, no, it's fine. It's not that it doesn't work. And if you don't want to have to care about your security settings, then yeah, Seek is wonderful. It's the same community. It's the same AI backend. There's just only on, and if you were going to go find Seek and it's SEEK, you would still go to iNaturalist to get that. It's in the App Store, both for Android and for iPhone. And I know kids that have used it, but so you'll get the same AI backend, you'll get the same helpful information. You won't have a choice about your security settings, and the information that you provide won't be available to anyone else. So as I take information and other people take information on iNaturalist, if it is confirmed by the community to be whatever wildlife or plant we say it is, then that can be used by researchers trying to look at things. So for instance, my husband was taking a geospatial information systems course. GIS is the new word for maps. And he wanted to take a look at oaks, native oaks in San Francisco. And honestly, we have so few that he ended up mapping the eucalyptus and the Monterey cypress, which although native to California are not native to San Francisco. And so he was able to use iNaturalist observations and compare that with satellite imagery. And so it was really useful. It was fun to see iNaturalist information being used by a project by someone professional.
That's great. Well, let's see, there's a few other questions. Oh, asking if the flower on the dog violets are also edible or just the leaves.
I have looked and looked and looked because English violet flowers are edible and then they're candied and they're delicious. And I really want to know. And I have not been able to find a confirming reference for that. I would love to know. And so every year I look at the violet flowers and I'm like, this year I'm just going to go ahead and try it. And then I go, no, I'm not. I'm not trying. I'm not going to eat something if I don't have a confirming reference that it's edible.
Good. That's good. You're being safe.
Yeah.
But someone confirms that California black walnuts are delicious, although
Yes.
although very difficult to remove from the shells. So
Very nice. Oh, I'm so glad they're delicious. See, California, we're delicious.
okay, let's see. Oh, talking about they were getting pine nuts from their gray pines that they have
Nice.
in their area. Yes. More about this madrone bark infusion. It sounds great.
It's such a
Tastes like
pretty thing.
Boygos. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Oh, here somebody says they ate a dog violet and they didn't die.
Oh, great. And I am, I'm eating mine this year. Thank you.
But she only ate one flower. So,
That's okay.
but she said she ate English violets as a child.
Oh, nice.
So, I don't know.
I suspect it is edible. It's so closely related to the English viola.
The one I couldn't find information on, you've got a native violet to you in Marin called Viola sempervirens. It's redwood understory.
Mhm.
And I just couldn't find an edibility reference for it. I wouldn't see why it wouldn't be, but I didn't want to add it because I wasn't sure. And so I don't know if any of you
I don't know.
have tried to eat the sempervirens version of the, because it's native to you and not to me.
And Susan, you said you might have some questions for the audience?
Oh, so the questions that I had are again and again. Have you eaten this? Is it delicious?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
it delicious?
Very good.
A lot of these I have eaten. I just don't know if some of them are delicious. So thank you so much for letting me know about the arbutus and about the California walnut. If anybody's eaten the California, is it Torreya?
Yeah, the nutmeg, California nutmeg is the common name.
Have you tried it?
I haven't. I don't know
Yeah.
anyone who has.
I would love to know. And has anybody eaten your native cherries? Either one of them?
That I don't know either.
The holly leaf cherry.
Yeah, which we don't have in Marin, but it kind of skips. It's south and north of us. But we grow it in Marin. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't eaten holly leaf
on
cherry
that.
because it's on sand, but somebody assured me that it's tasty. But these other two, I just haven't eaten. I did plant Virginiana demesia last year, and it's not dead, but it didn't grow at all, which is just so strange. It's in the same little patch that a blue elderberry that doubled in size is in. So I just can't have the same expectation for one plant to another. And has anybody eaten osoberry?
Looking, a few more people have added to the chat. Nobody's mentioned the osoberry yet.
You know, there's a very nice osoberry bush in the native plant garden that I worked on in Chico. And I've looked at the berries and I said, I wonder if they're edible. And of course, then the next time I came back, they were all gone. So somebody had eaten them, whether it was birds or the deer or something. But I never tasted one myself.
And Vernon points out that California nutmeg is in the yew family, so some caution should be exercised in trying it.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's really good to know.
Yews are very toxic.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And someone else mentions or asks if the bitter cherry is different than choke cherry. They
Yes.
ate the latter as a kid.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I really like using the Latin names. This way I'm sure of what I'm talking about,
Mhm.
because there's a whole bunch of different huckleberries across the US. There's a bunch of different choke cherries across the US. The Prunus virginiana demesia is also called choke cherry.
Exactly.
If they grew up as a kid in this area, then it might have been that, in which case, yay, it's good to know that someday when that tree finishes growing, or at least gets further along, it will be tasty. But I would really like to know if the bitter cherry is any good. I did read in the ethnobotany research that said at least one of the tribes is using it as celebration food, which you would think you would only do if it were good. So
And someone else mentions that they are successfully growing holly leaf cherries, so Prunus ilicifolia and probably Lyonii on clay, and they seem to be doing just fine. And I've grown it on pretty heavy soil successfully as well. So I
oh,
think it depends. Maybe not dense clay, but certainly the heavier soils.
the nice thing about Prunus ilicifolia, I can't speak to Ohlone, is that to the Leone, the Southern California version, the ilicifolia has got a really huge north-south range. So it's going to be great for climate change. It's evergreen as opposed to deciduous, like so many of the Prunus family. And you can hedge it. I've seen pictures of people doing very precise hedges with it, which again, I'm too lazy to do, but it's really good to know that someone else was able to do that, because it's so pretty in terms of being very showy white flowers and then showy red berries, and they're tasty and it's evergreen. So lots to love there, even for a very formal garden.
Exactly. And someone asks if Jennifer asks if there is any good book reference for learning the Latin names of plants.
Oh, how interesting. I use Calscape myself to,
And I use Calflora, so I think both of those websites are good. If you
yeah,
have a common name, to start with.
yes, you're right. Calflora also is great about having the Latin name. All of the native nurseries have got the Latin name as well as the common name. And then if it's a cultivar, they'll add that too. So it's very useful to have that precision, because sometimes you'll have a version that does better or more poorly on the kind of soil that you've got. And just between the two violets that I was talking about, the yellow one and the purple one is so drought tolerant, and the yellow one wants a lot of water. I do grow them both, but the yellow one's in a seep. So, because I think we're built on top of an underground creek.
Interesting, because here in Marin, Viola pedunculata, the yellow one, grows out in sunny grasslands and not necessarily in damp areas, but it has a tuber, which is unusual for a violet, and I think it simply goes dormant to the tuber, and that's its defense in the wild against summer drought. It just dries up.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was it needed a lot of water from, I think, Hellscape, and so I've just
interesting.
where it's perfectly happy. And it was next to Seep monkey flower. We had a terrible drought a few years ago. I think it was 2011, 2012, and the Seep monkey flower just went away, and the yellow violet was fine and just comes back year after year. It could be also that it's just more drought tolerant than Seep monkey flower.
And George Zhang asks if the presentation will be available for review. And yes, it has been recorded and will be available on the chapter's Zoom site.
Yes, it is a lot of information, but that's because we have a lot of delicious edible plants.
Susan, have you made a spreadsheet of the plants for San Francisco with the little icons, name, icon, that kind of thing?
That
Like
is a completely fair question. I have made a spreadsheet for the container plants.
Okay.
I have my own incredibly personal, I have a personal, extremely messy spreadsheet. So it's sort of like looking inside my head, which is, I really can't recommend without a great deal of chocolate. But I haven't done that. I just have it for the container plants. It is one of the things I've been asked to do for landscape people. It's a good idea. All right, on my to-do list. Where would you want that?
Oh, if you posted it on your own chapter's website, that would probably be fine.
We do have two spreadsheets up there already. One is that Talamy list for the caterpillars of the butterflies and moths. And the other one, although it was modified for just San Francisco, so it doesn't have pines on it, things like pines or firs. And I could send you, I've got his for the whole Bay Area, and I can send that to one of you to add to the Marin site. We don't have it. In fact, who would like that?
Oh, Anne, would you be able to?
Well, yeah,
Get
we'd
that
probably get it to Vernon. Vernon would be the poster
Great.
Okay.
poster person, but if you send it to me, I can forward it on to him.
Yeah, I can send you the Talamy version, and then the Jared Fowler information for the specialist bees I've put into a spreadsheet, and I'm not done with it yet, but we've posted the partial one on the CNPS Yerba Buena biodiversity website. Because it's just so dramatically different for the bees than it is for the butterflies. At which point I just sort of threw up my hands and went, I can plant everything. I should plant everything. This is just an excuse to plant everything.
Yeah, well, you've got enough space.
That's what public spaces are for. Make friends with your local parks people. And we've got 17 different agencies that plant plants, and that doesn't even count the state. So, but between Rec and Park and the water company and Department of Public Works has got a lot of all of the staircases of San Francisco are what's called unaccepted streets, and they're all Department of Public Works space. And so that's all just open season as long as you don't plant anything dangerous.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And I know that you've got a lot more national park space, and so you wouldn't be able to do that there. And we wouldn't try it in our national parks either, but in San Francisco Rec and Park, a lot of things happened during COVID. And so we got permission to go in there and weed without supervision, and recently got permission for a few of the, not the natural areas, the areas that burned in the 1906 earthquake and fire, were permitted to plant native plants there. So there are some parts of San Francisco that are considered natural, and we're not permitted to plant there. But if it was burned in 1906, we can plant in it.
Well, you've gotten so many compliments also from the chat, and I've saved the chat, so I can forward the chat on to you, Susan.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, we do have George has got a question about the milkweed. So yeah, I've been doing some presentations on butterflies as well. And something I found out during one of the butterfly presentations was that one of the reasons we are having this incredibly precipitous drop in the monarch population is because the milkweed plants are being covered in pesticide to prevent the light brown apple moth from having a snack. I guess there's 300 different plants that the light brown apple moth caterpillar, the invasive light brown apple moth caterpillar, can use for food. And milkweed is one of them. Supposedly there's a California Department of Agriculture regulation. I have been trying to find it so that I could write a very specific request to the California Department of Agriculture to permit milkweed plants to be exempt from that pesticide. So it's probably still safe to buy milkweed seeds, but don't buy the plants anymore. Only buy the West Coast milkweed, please. The fasciculatus. Don't buy the East Coast. But yeah, at this point, just buy the seeds. So thank you for that reminder.
Okay, well, I think we've come to the end of the program here, and questions and comments. So thank you very much, Susan. It was a very informative program, and again, I think so much information that we'll all want to go and revisit it on the website. Pick up extra information that we might have missed.
Have excuses to buy plants. You're like, no, I just need these last 5 plants.
You can always squeeze something else in.
I'm using public spaces at this point.
Exactly.
It's sad.
Befriend your neighbors and invade their gardens.
I have planted in my neighbors as well. Really,
and sidewalk strips.
Sidewalk strips, weird Department of Public Works stairways, anything. Just make friends and schools. Schools are great. They can always use, especially edible plants. So we've got a gardening group with a 5-year-old in it. Now that he's going to elementary school, he was 4, now he's 5. Elementary school, he's got an aftercare. They both have gardens, and the aftercare gardener introduced me to the middle school gardener. So because I know a 5-year-old, I have access to 3 schools that all want edible native plants.
That's great. That's great.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye.
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 Let's see, Susan, you're the host, so if you would just shut the meeting down, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.